Welcome to the History of European Theatre podcast, and thanks for joining me on this journey through millennia of theatrical history. Episode 192, Hamlet, Part 1, That One May Smile and Be a Villain. Last time, we travelled to Rome to witness the death of Caesar and the beginning of the end of the Roman Republic, a subject that presumably Shakespeare knew he would return to soon. As a play that combined historical characters with contemporary political discussion, bloody revenge tragedy and a hint of the supernatural, it seems that Shakespeare was hitting all of the notes needed to keep every part of his diverse audience happy, and with only some comic relief missing. It was a big play to discuss, and I was grateful to also have Ricky Jukes discussing it with me, to pull more thoughts out from a performance point of view. I do hope that you enjoyed Ricky's entertaining take on the play too. But now, we come to an even bigger challenge, perhaps the biggest in the Shakespearean canon, with the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Although the scholarly consensus has settled on 1599 or 1600 for the authorship date of Hamlet, it is in fact quite a difficult play to date. The first recorded performance of the play is, strangely, on board a ship in 1607. The Dragon was an East India Company ship which at the time was laying off the east coast of Africa. In his journal, the captain notes that the acting of Hamlet kept my people from idleness and unlawful games and sleep. However, from the printing history the date can be pulled back further to the turn of the century, but this also has its complexities. The play was first registered with the Stationers' Company in July 1602 as The Revenge of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. The quarto edition, published in 1603, said that the play had been lately acted by the Lord Chamberlain, his servants. However, as printed, this version of the play is very much shorter than subsequent quarto editions, and the version in the first folio. The play is not mentioned by Francis Mears, which puts it later than 1598. And is commented on by Gabriel Harvey in a note dated somewhere between 1598 and 1601. There are other contemporary references that could put the play earlier, but these most likely refer to an earlier stage version of the Hamlet story, which is now lost. Some comments by Thomas Nash from 1589 suggest that this play was written by Thomas Kyd, and it was registered with the Admiral's Men at the Rose Theatre in 1594, but apart from this, little can be said about it for certain, and it certainly complicates the dating of Shakespeare's version. The first quarto edition is considered a bad version, and the theory goes it was a reported version based on the memory of the actor who played the minor parts of Marcellus, Voltimand and Lucianus, because scenes featuring these characters are much more fully rendered than the others. The second quarto, published a year later, is considered a much more authoritative version, possibly even being Shakespeare's approved version of the play. It is about double the length of the first quarto, and in some respects is considered superior to the first folio version. These variations result in editors and directors being able to decide which version of the play to produce, or how to edit together choice parts into a whole. In a complete version, incorporating all of the different elements, the play would be very long indeed. Even in a standard version, it is lengthy. I recently rewatched the BBC 1980 version with Derek Jacobi playing Hamlet, which ran for 3.5 hours. Laurence Olivier cut his 1948 film to just over 2.5 hours, and the latest National Theatre version ran to 2 hours 50 minutes. The 2021-22 production at Shakespeare's Globe ran for 3 hours 15 minutes, which is a test for any groundling's legs. Shakespeare's source for the play is also a little uncertain. It is quite possible that the only source he knew directly was the lost earlier stage version of the play, sometimes now referred to as the ur-Hamlet. The earliest known version of the story in print in English was a translation of the Histoire tragique by French author Françoise de Belforêt, which featured the story called The History of Hamlet. But that English version was published in 1608 and appears to borrow phrases from Shakespeare's play rather than the other way around. The origins of the story are in the Norse folk tale of Amleth, which was first published in Latin in about the year 1200, but this tale really only supplies the nuts and bolts of the plot, and little of the intrigue and humanising qualities of the main characters in Shakespeare's play. The original story ends with Hamlet having returned from England, married to an English princess, and in disguise, so that he can set the great hall alight, burning it to the ground and killing all of those inside it as they drunkenly feast. It is an end that features even more deaths than Shakespeare's version and would be impossible to stage. And there is no ghost prompting revenge, no mystery about the old king's death, no clutching of a skull in a graveyard, no players, and little musing on the nature of existence. Some of these elements may have been suggested by the earlier staged version, and Nash's comment suggests that it did include the ghost of Hamlet's father, the character of Laertes, and Ophelia's madness. Now, I'm pretty sure that you know the plot of this play, so I'm going straight on with my thoughts on it, but I will deal with things chronologically and mention the main points of the plot as we go so that you can keep track of where we are. The arresting opening scene, where the simple line, "Who's there?", which is surely also one of the most effective ever written, brings on the ghost of Hamlet's father, who appears to the guard and Hamlet's friend Horatio. There is some important exposition in that scene concerning the history between the kings of Norway and Denmark, but the appearance of the silent ghost dominates it. Horatio leaves to inform Hamlet, and we feel sure that the ghost will be back. But the play moves on, and we are in the court of Claudius, where he sends ambassadors to Norway to fend off a threatened attack by Fortinbras, the crown prince. His role in the play is small but significant. We have already heard from Hamlet's friend Horatio that the King of Norway was slain in single combat by Hamlet's father. The parallels between Hamlet and Fortinbras become clear. Both are princes of their realms, bearing the name of their suddenly dead fathers. But there the comparisons end. Fortinbras is decisive, even hot-headed, and most certainly a soldier prince. The thoughtful, and perhaps at times indecisive Hamlet, is his opposite in these respects. Shakespeare may also have been thinking about some contemporary politics. At the time, Denmark and Norway as two kingdoms were united under one king, and although Elizabeth still reigned in England, the possibility of the succession going to James, and therefore the likelihood of a united England and Scotland, was well known, if little discussed in public at least. Fortinbras agrees not to invade Denmark, but has permission to march his men across the land to wrest some lands from Poland, which from a plot point of view places his army conveniently close to intervene at the climax of the play. The scene ends with Hamlet regretting the speed with which his mother has married his uncle, before he is told of the ghost and that it will appear again soon. Polonius, the chief counsellor, Laertes, his son, and Ophelia, his daughter, are then introduced, where Ophelia is warned off trusting Hamlet's expressions of love. Laertes is given permission to return to France, with some comic advice from Polonius on how he should behave. Polonius is a popular character from the Shakespeare canon. On the surface, he is seen as a comic character, a foolish old man who meddles in the lives of his children. But we have to remember that he is also the king's adviser, and a man retained from the old king's staff, presumably because he was good at his job. There is more to Polonius than an obvious interpretation will show, but I'll leave him here for the moment. We will return to him later. Both of his children have significant roles to play in the story, but so far we've just had them introduced. On the platform of the castle, when the ghost reappears, Hamlet runs after the apparition, and at last the ghost speaks. It is very clear about what his brother's crimes are, and the responsibility Hamlet has to avenge them with his murder, which must be achieved quickly before Claudius has a chance to repent. This is also to the benefit of the ghost, who says, "I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain time to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast in fires, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away." So the ghost is in purgatory and denied the benefits of eternal life in heaven until his murder is avenged. From the off, Hamlet is faced with a dilemma. Should he commit murder and condemn his own soul, or betray his father and leave him to the torments of purgatory? Here, two of the main themes of the play are introduced and conjoined: revenge, and spirituality. For the rest of the play, Hamlet is trying to reconcile these demands. His indecision is a point we will return to, but these matters, ideas of how to blend honourable revenge with spiritual purity, were of very significant importance to the early modern mind, and it would have been no surprise to the contemporary audience that Hamlet wrestles with the questions and is very divided over them. It is here that Hamlet decides to feign a form of madness, or perhaps now we might say depression, while he finds a time and place for revenge. Hamlet very thoroughly swears his witnesses to secrecy. There is a lot of repetitive swearing in this scene, highlighting the importance of the sworn oath to the Elizabethan mind, but also it is significant that it is not only Hamlet who sees and hears the ghost. Had that been the case, then his reactions could have been put down to madness or grief. But with the spirit's presence being as visible to his companions as it is to us in the audience, the ghost really takes on a reality that is striking. It is that realness of the ghost that pushes Hamlet eventually to decide on revenge, and poses one of the central questions of the play. Is revenge the right course of action, even in extreme circumstances? Hamlet's answer is ultimately yes, but he pays with his death. Laertes also answers that question in the same way, and suffers the same fate. But in the end, he seeks forgiveness from Hamlet, taking the Christian route and breaking the revenge cycle. As he says, "Exchange forgiveness with me, noble Hamlet. Mine and my father's death come not unto thee, nor thine on me." So whether you see the influence of the ghost as encouraging Hamlet's revenge or causing him to doubt his actions and procrastinate, and perhaps it is actually both of those things, the impacts of this scene resonate right to the end of the play. We move on, and Polonius hears from Ophelia how Hamlet has approached her in an apparent state of madness. Polonius decides that this must be because she has been avoiding him and rejected him, a serious and significant misjudgment on his part, and he goes off to tell the king. Ophelia's position at court is an awkward one. As the daughter of a counsellor, however well respected he might be, a romantic entanglement with the son of the old king would not be on the cards. As Laertes points out to her, such marriages are matters of statecraft and not romantic love. Advances from Hamlet would have been tricky for Ophelia even before recent events, and her father's and brother's advice to be wary is sound, if a little harsh. But there is more than a hint of a previous attraction between Hamlet and Ophelia in a conversation that is in the context of honesty, when Ophelia asks, "Could beauty, my lord, have better commerce than with honesty?" And Hamlet replies, "Ay, truly, for the power of beauty will sooner transform honesty from what it is to a bawd than the force of honesty can translate beauty into his likeness." This was sometimes a paradox, but now the time gives proof. I did love you once. Having been subject to rejection and insults from Hamlet, Ophelia will descend into madness and suicide, making her collateral damage in his search for revenge, suicide being the worst of crimes in the Christian mind. She represents innocent youth corrupted, and we might take the view that this is not just on Hamlet's part, but by the Danish court in general. Her madness is caused by loss of trust, both in Hamlet's nobility as a prince of the realm, and in the usually unquestioned wisdom of her father. Her disintegration as an individual might be taken as a reflection of the disintegration of the court under Claudius, which is based on acts of murder and incest. For some, Ophelia is seen as a weak character who should stand up to the men who manipulate her. But for a woman in her position and in her time, this was not an option, nor is it the purpose of the character. Although her reactions and descent into madness can be difficult for the modern audience, the scene where she distributes flowers to the court is one of the most memorable in the play, and her death and Hamlet's command for her to go to a nunnery have entered popular culture with other iconic scenes and lines from the play. That scene is laden with symbolic meaning, which Shakespeare must have expected many in his audience to appreciate. As she says to her brother, "There's rosemary, that's for remembrance. Pray you, love, remember. And there is pansies, that's for thoughts." And then she continues, There's fennel for you, and columbines. There's rue for you, and here's some for me. We may call it herb of grace or Sundays. You must wear the rue with a difference. There's a daisy. I would give you some violets, but they withered all when my father died. They say he made a good end. Each flower or herb represents an emotion or betrayal that she has encountered. Rosemary stands for remembrance, pansies for thoughts, fennel for flattery, columbines for ingratitude, rue for regret, daisies for unhappiness in love or innocence, and violets for faithfulness. But these have withered, suggesting that she has no faith in the explanation she has heard for her father's death. She may not be in a position to hold the court to account, but she lets them know that she sees through their corruption and betrayals. Speaking to each flower as she hands them out, leaving the members of the court no choice but to awkwardly accept them, makes the gesture intensely personal and emotional. And once again we see Shakespeare using the law of the garden and language that is both descriptive and beautiful to underscore the emotional content of the play. In response to Polonius's assessment of the situation, Claudius decides to send Hamlet's school friends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to keep watch on him. It doesn't take long for Hamlet to work out what they are up to and to play up to his assumed madness. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are two relatively minor characters who have, perhaps mostly thanks to Tom Stoppard and his 1966 play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, have also entered the popular imagination. I won't get distracted into talking about that play, but do go and see it if you get the chance. It is funny and thought-provoking and was Stoppard's calling card to the theatre. The degree to which Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are happy to spy and report on their friend has been much discussed over the years. They are not completely honest with Hamlet or Claudius, and largely ineffectual in their attempts to understand what Hamlet is up to. They are, perhaps because of that inability, rather too eager to believe the madness story spun to them by Claudius. If they did know of the contents of Claudius's letter, and it is by no means clear if they did, then perhaps Hamlet is justified in his actions where he sends them to their deaths. I prefer to think that they are simply his friends who are given an impossible task and soon find themselves out of their depth and carried by events. Whichever way we see that, they serve to highlight Hamlet's growing isolation at court and provide moments of irony, most notably when Rosencrantz declares, "The world's grown honest." Given Rosencrantz is being far from honest in spying on his friend, and that he expands his claim to the world, where we see the world of the court as also being far from honest, it is a deeply ironic punch, which also reminds us that the difference between appearances and reality is another theme that runs through the play. As they talk, a group of players arrive. They are known to Hamlet, and he arranges for them to perform the Murger of Gonzago, with some new lines added that he will write. Realising that the player has put more effort into his performance than he has into revenging his father, Hamlet hopes that the play will prove Claudius's guilt. The players and the play within the play that they perform, which Hamlet renames the Mousetrap, is of particular interest to anyone looking at theatre history because of the insight it seems to give to acting styles and genres of the time. There is Polonius, a man who has acted in his past, and his humorous take on the genres that this obviously very excellent troupe of actors can play. As he says, "The best actors in the world, either for tragedy, comedy, history, pastoral, pastoral comical, historical pastoral, tragical historical, tragical comical historical pastoral, scene individable, or poem unlimited. Seneca cannot be too heavy, nor Plautus too light. For the law of writ and the liberty, these are the only men." Seneca there representing the heaviest of tragedies, and Plautus the lightest of comedies. Hamlet's own advice to the player is rather more serious. "Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of our players do, I have as lief the town crier speak my lines. Nor do not saw the air too much with your hand, thus, but use it all gently. For in the very torrent, tempest, and, as I may say, whirlwind of your passion, you must acquire and beget a temperance that must give it smoothness. Oh, it offends me to the soul to hear a robustious, periwig-pated fellow tear a passion to tatters, to very rags, to split the ears of the groundlings, who for the most part are capable of nothing but inexplicable dumb show and noise. I would have such a fellow whipped for o'erdoing termagant. It out-Herods Herod, pray avoid it. Termagant there refers to a god character from the morality plays that was violent and disruptive to men. Having originated in 11th century literature as a god that it was supposed the Muslims worshipped, by Shakespeare's time the term was also applied to fiery-tempered and overbearing women. That idea of over-exaggeration by players on stage being conflated with extreme violence is further emphasised by the idea that such acting out-Herods Herod, the man who in the New Testament orders the slaying of all newborn male children to ensure that the prophecy of Jesus' coming is not fulfilled. As the player acquiesces, Hamlet continues, "Be not too tame neither, but let your own discretion be your tutor. Suit the action to the word to the action, with this special observance, that you o'erstep not the modesty of nature. For anything so o'erdone is from the purpose of playing, whose end, both at the first and now, was and is to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature, to show virtue her own feature, scorn her own image, and the very age and body of the time his form and pressure. Now this overdone or come tardy off, though it makes the unskilled laugh, cannot but make the judicious grieve, the censure of the which one must in your allowance or weigh a whole theatre of others. Oh, there have been players that I have seen play, and heard others praise, and that highly, not to speak it profanely, that neither having the accent of Christians nor the gait of Christian, pagan, or man, have so strutted and bellowed that I had thought some of nature's journeymen had made men, and not made them well. They imitated humanity so abominably." A speech that is often taken to be Shakespeare's plea for more naturalistic and subtle acting styles. Something that, we must assume, he felt that the complexities of human nature and behaviour shown in his plays deserved. The player says that he hopes his men have reformed themselves of that fault, and Hamlet continues, "Oh, reform it altogether, and let those that play your clowns speak no more than is set down for them. For there be of them that will themselves laugh, to set on some quantity of barren spectators to laugh too, though in the meantime some necessary question of the play be then to be considered. That's villainous, and shows a more pitiful ambition in the fool that uses it." Which is a speech often said to be a particular jibe at the extemporising and comic capering of clowns like Will Kemp. An idea that supports the suggestion that Kemp left the company because of artistic differences caused by changes in the nature of plays and public entertainment that Kemp was not keeping up with. But the players and the play within the play are not just an interlude that allows Shakespeare to vent about the state of the theatre and the art of playing, but also a device to advance the plot and give us further insight into Hamlet's character. Although we don't know the details of his plan until he reflects on it in soliloquy after dismissing the players, we sense something is forming gradually in his mind. As he does elsewhere, such as when he engineers the dispatching of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, he takes an opportunity that presents itself and bends it to his own ends. First he requests a passionate speech, which leads to the story of the death of Priam at the hands of Pyrrhus, an echo of his situation, as this is another story of a son avenging his father. Via thoughts of Hecuba, this leads him to the Murger of Gonzago, and the 12 or 16 lines that he will add. It is as the play is acted that Hamlet becomes convinced of Claudius's guilt because of his reaction, so his plan works. That also means that he can trust his father's ghost, and the demands for revenge that are being made of him. Before the play is presented, we hear Rosencrantz and Guildenstern admitting that they have failed to find the cause of Hamlet's madness. So Polonius arranges things so that Claudius and he will observe a meeting between Ophelia and Hamlet. Having positioned Ophelia to ensure a meeting, they see that Hamlet at first is courteous to her, but then turns on her, insulting her and women in general, until he finally advises her to make off to a nunnery. Claudius decides to send Hamlet on a diplomatic mission to England to get him away from court, but Polonius persuades him to delay until Hamlet and Gertrude have spoken. The players perform a dumb show for the court, and then the play with the dialogue that mirrors the actions of Claudius against his brother. At the moment of the enacted murder, Claudius rushes out, and Hamlet is convinced of his guilt. Following Claudius's exit in some disarray, and as Hamlet seeks his mother, he comes across his uncle at prayer. Initially resolving to kill the king there and then, he stands over him as he prays, sword ready, and echoing the other murderers poised over unaware bodies and ready to kill that we have seen in the dumb show and the play presented at court. But he holds back, fearing that if killed at prayer, Claudius would go straight to heaven, and the revenge would be pointless. Although some have taken this to be another sign of Hamlet's inability to act decisively, the opposing view is that it shows Hamlet's careful thought processes in spite of this high-pressure situation that he is in, and that he is, in fact, determined to ensure that Claudius receives the punishment he deserves, eternal damnation. However, in the end, this is a heavily ironic scene, as Claudius, left alone, reveals that, disturbed by the play and the memory of his actions, he was unable to pray, and therefore, had Hamlet taken his moment, his revenge would have been absolutely complete. Many commentators see this scene as the still heart of the tragedy, and the point at which Hamlet's behaviour finally turns, so that the ending becomes inevitable, and it becomes difficult to see if Hamlet has not, in fact, gone a little mad. Events are now escalating at pace. Polonius's plan to observe Hamlet with the Queen goes disastrously wrong when Hamlet aggressively accuses the Queen of incest with her brother-in-law. He never uses that word, but his meaning is clear. It only takes a 16-line conversation for Gertrude to feel so threatened that she calls for help, causing the hidden Polonius to echo her call, and assuming that it is his uncle, Hamlet stabs him through the curtain. Hamlet is unmoved, apart from regretting he mistook Polonius for the king, saying, "A bloody deed, almost as bad, good mother, as kill a king and marry with his brother." Hamlet berates his mother for marrying Claudius and is clearly considering that she may have been party to the murder of her husband. His speech is an impassioned outpouring. For the first and only time we see him alone with his mother. In public he has lobbed the odd comment at her to test her reaction, but now we see that the tension that has been building from the initial unease with her in her hasty marriage to this point has finally burst. "Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, thaw and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon 'gainst self-slaughter. O God, God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this word. Fie on the all, fie! 'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. That it should come to this, but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king, that was to this Hyperion to a satire. So loving to my mother, that he might not between the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth must I remember. Why, she would hang on him, as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. And yet within a month let me not think on it. Frailty thy name is, woman. A little month, or ere those shoes were old with which he followed my poor father's body, like Niobe all tears, why she, even she, O God, a beast that once discourse of reason would have mourned longer, married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules. Within a month, ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing of her galled eyes, she married, O most wicked speed, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor cannot come to good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue." This assessment of a mother by a son is brutal and shocking even to our ears, But imagine the effect on the Elizabethan audience, who lived in a society where respecting and honouring your parents was a central tenet that went back to biblical roots. Hamlet's speech, however, does have the desired effect to an extent, and Gertrude at last shows some real feeling and concern for the situation, and Hamlet is convinced of her innocence in the matter of her husband's murder. But it is a fragile truce, and the ghost returns to remind him of his obligations to revenge. This time, only he sees the spirit, and Gertrude is left believing that he has indeed become mad. Hamlet exits, dragging the body of Polonius behind him. And this is where I'm going to leave things for this episode, but don't worry, we are far from done with Hamlet yet. As I've looked at more or less the first half of the play so far, I think it's important to reiterate how well crafted the opening and subsequent action of the play is. The genre of revenge tragedy always had a bit of a problem with timings. The reason for the revenge has to be established, and then the act itself dramatised, and all within a quick or compressed time frame. In other works, the intervening periods are typically filled with subplots, which are successful or not to varying degrees. Just one of the things that is so impressive about Hamlet is that Shakespeare keeps to a single line of action, with not one scene wasted in terms of plot or character progression. His use of the passing of time is important too. Rather cleverly on Shakespeare's part, the exposition concerning the crime that needs revenging is not fully revealed until the end of Act 1. In fact, almost all of Act 1 is exposition, yet it remains dramatic, filled with tension, and a hugely theatrical experience for the audience. The play opens at midnight, and the first scene ends with the dawn rising. Horatio then says that he will tell of the spirit to young Hamlet, which is actually the first time that the hero in the play is mentioned. Shortly after, when they find him and reveal what has happened, piquing his interest, he is resolved to join them the following night, and he longs for that time to come, finding the intervening day an unnecessary delay. But Shakespeare makes good use of this time, with scenes introducing Polonius and his family and their relationship with Hamlet. Then, with the following scene, we are again on the platform the following evening, and at this point, just before another dawn arrives, the duty of revenge is imposed on Hamlet. So we have covered about 30 hours in 5 closely related scenes, and the audience expectation is set for the revenge to commence. But with the opening of Act 2, Shakespeare throws us something of a curveball, as Polonius and Rinaldo, a character that we only see in this scene, discuss sending money to Laertes in Paris and how Polonius can keep an eye on his behaviour. It is very different in tone from the previous scenes. As it does not directly affect the plot, it has often been a candidate for cutting in the name of reducing the length of the play. But it is one of those cleverly inserted small scenes that has several functions theatrically. It marks the passing of time by showing Laertes as having been absent for a while, and it establishes the character of Polonius further, and particularly establishes his mode of laboured speech and circular conversation that sets him up to be a victim of the barbed arrows of wit that Hamlet will throw at him. Without realising it, perhaps we are now immersed in a world where characters spy upon each other and role-play to their own advantage. Now, things are set up perfectly for the drama to unfold. Revenge tragedy is the format of the play, but Shakespeare's real interest surely was sparked by the situation which causes revenge to be necessary, not the act of revenge itself. That duty comes from a son who loved and respected his dead father, and his mother and his uncle, who have disappointed him in unimaginable ways. The combination of political ambition and sexual passion is the arena for this conflict of moral decisions that Hamlet has to work through, and this all makes for Shakespeare's most complex play to date. Next time it is a very special guest episode where we will be looking at the language of Hamlet, and in particular an examination of 2 of the most famous speeches from the play, as well as discussing more about the different versions of the play and the character of Polonius and others. and then it will be back to my review of the play as things come to their highly dramatic conclusion. In the meantime, if you've not done so already, please join the Facebook page or group, or find the podcast on Instagram or Blue Sky to keep up to date with new episodes and other theatre-related things. If you do feel able to help with the cost of running the podcast, then please head on over to Patreon, where you will find additional content for a small monthly fee or a one-off donation for selected episodes. You can also make a one-off show of support through Ko-fi.com. I look forward to your company next time, but if you have any comments or concerns in the meantime, you can contact me by email at thoetp@gmail.com or through the website, where you can leave me a voice message by clicking on the microphone icon, or you can write to me on the contact page. That's all at www.thehistoryofeuropeantheatre.com.